80 AD, the Roman Colosseum, 50,000 people screaming. In the center of the arena, a woman chained to a wooden structure, naked, terrified. Suddenly, they release a bull, not to kill her, for something worse. The guards have built a mechanical replica of a cow. They shove the woman inside and force the bull to mount her. It's an execution, but disguised as the myth of Pasiphae, the queen who had union with a bull. The crowd goes wild. Children watch, senators laugh. Welcome to Roman entertainment. This isn't fiction. It really happened. The poet Martial was there at the Colosseum's inauguration, and he wrote it down. We saw Pasiphae joined to the Dictaean bull. The ancient legend received its proof under Caesar. Rome, the greatest empire in history. Laws, aqueducts, philosophy, and this. Public rape as family entertainment. Today, you're going to discover the most brutal, most perverted, most inhuman spectacles that Rome organized in the arena. Things Hollywood would never show. Things your teachers never mentioned. But things the Romans documented in detail. Because this wasn't madness. It was politics, propaganda, control. And it was completely legal. I'm Crown and Dagger. And here there's no censorship. Only the truth Rome prefers you forget. Notice how, when they talk about the Colosseum, they always mention heroic gladiators. But they never tell you this. Every week, Crown and Dagger unearths the most disturbing stories the world prefers to ignore. If you want unfiltered history, hit like and subscribe, because what comes next is much more brutal. Rome, 1st to 4th century AD, 60 million people, the largest empire in human history, and every major city had one thing in common: an arena. Over 250 amphitheaters across Roman territory. The Colosseum held 50,000 spectators, and it was packed almost daily. Here's what you need to understand. This wasn't random violence. It was industrial-scale death. Ancient historians estimated that hundreds of thousands of people died in Roman arenas across 4 centuries, their blood soaking into the sand day after day, year after year. That's an entire city erased for entertainment. At the Colosseum's inauguration, Emperor Titus celebrated with 100 consecutive days of games. Thousands of animals slaughtered, the stench of death hanging thick in the summer air. That's dozens of deaths per day for amusement. The crowds never tiring, always hungry for more. Emperor Trajan, after conquering Dacia, held 123 days of games, with 10,000 gladiators and thousands of prisoners executed, their final screams echoing off marble walls. The philosopher Seneca attended these games and wrote something that still chills the soul. I come home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman, he confessed, because I have been among humans. He watched the midday executions, criminals tied to stakes, lions released, the crowd betting on how long each victim would scream before dying, placing coins while men begged for mercy. That was lunch, entertainment. Why? Because the arena did something no other institution could. It taught obedience through pleasure. When you watch a man torn apart, you learn what happens to Rome's enemies. When you cheer as someone dies, you become complicit, your own hands metaphorically soaked in blood. And that complicity was the point. According to historian Cassius Dio, Rome spent more on arena entertainment than on roads, schools, or hospitals. The empire bleeding gold for blood. By the 2nd century AD, they had supply chains bringing lions from Africa, criminals from Gaul, Christians from Judea. It was bureaucratic, scheduled, budgeted. Death packaged as entertainment, delivered daily to a population addicted to brutality. What you just heard, that was the system. Now let me show you what actually happened in that sand, the spectacles that made 50,000 people cheer while humanity died in front of them. Starting with how it all began at a funeral with blood, 264 BC. 3 sons wanted to honor their dead father, not with prayers, but with blood. They armed 3 pairs of slaves and forced them to fight to the death in the Forum Boreum, a cattle market reeking of dung and smoke, the air thick with flies and fear. This wasn't entertainment. It was munus, a duty owed to the dead, a sacred obligation written in crimson. The practice came from Rome's enemies, the Campanians and Samnites. They believed restless spirits needed blood to find peace, to quiet their eternal wandering. But Roman elites saw something else: power. A funeral with bloodshed proved wealth. A funeral with spectacular bloodshed proved dominance, separated the mighty from the weak. By the 3rd century BC, politicians were using funeral games as campaign tools, buying votes with violence. The Senate called it piety. The crowd knew it was politics, and they didn't care. Even the armor told stories. The Samnite gladiator wore gear mimicking Rome's conquered enemies, every piece a reminder of defeat. Every slash was a replay of Roman victories, history written with steel. Death became propaganda. Temporary wooden stands gave way to permanent amphitheaters, temples to violence where death whispered the same message. Rome commands men, armies, even death itself. If funeral games were how it started, what came next turned the arena into Rome's cruelest spectacle. Because Rome discovered something. Exotic suffering sells better than ordinary death. Lions from North Africa, leopards from the Caucasus, crocodiles from the Nile, giraffes dragged across deserts, their legs trembling, eyes wild with terror. They weren't displayed as wonders. They were condemned as prey in a carnival of slaughter. Romans called these shows venationes, hunts. But they weren't hunts. They were executions of nature itself. Systematic annihilation dressed as sport. Julius Caesar set the tone in 46 BC parading a giraffe, the first ever seen in Europe. They called it a camelopardalis because Rome had no word for it, no language for such strange beauty. It didn't matter. The animal was thrown into the sand to be torn apart, its confusion and fear delighting thousands. The message: if Rome could seize the strangest beasts alive, it could conquer anything. The slaughter exploded. At the Colosseum's inauguration, Emperor Titus oversaw the deaths of thousands of animals in one festival, the sand turning red, then black with dried blood. Archaeologists found bones etched with deliberate starvation marks, evidence of calculated cruelty. Lions and bears were weakened beforehand to ensure a quick, bloody kill. Entertainment calibrated for maximum impact. Behind the scenes, logistics were brutal. Caravans dragged cages through scorching deserts, handlers dying of thirst and heat. Fleets floated them down the Nile, the animals screaming in the darkness below deck. Handlers risked their lives delivering living trophies to a city that demanded fresh blood with every sunrise. Pliny the Elder warned that rare species were vanishing from their homelands. Lions, leopards, elephants, he wrote with sorrow, pushed toward extinction. The Colosseum wasn't just a theater of death. It was an ecological wrecking ball. Animal massacres drew crowds. But Rome wanted more. They wanted suspense, imbalance, fights where the outcome was rigged. But the suffering was real. They wanted theater disguised as combat. When you picture a gladiator, you imagine 2 evenly matched warriors, honor and skill deciding the victor. The reality was twisted beyond recognition. Rome thrived on imbalance, contests engineered for cruelty, designed to humiliate before killing. Prisoners and criminals were shoved into the arena, dressed as clowns, their faces painted with garish colors, handed wooden swords, and sent to die against seasoned killers with real steel. The crowd jeered as the doomed flailed and fell, their desperate attempts at defense causing gales of mocking laughter. Public execution disguised as sport. The weapons became characters. The retiarius fought with a fisherman's net and trident against the secutor, whose helmet was designed to deflect the net. It wasn't skill. It was suspense. Would the net ensnare, or would the sword break through? The crowd held its breath with each cast. Sometimes one gladiator faced multiple foes, surrounded, overwhelmed. Other times, entire units clashed, turning the arena into a swamp of blood and mangled corpses, limbs scattered across blood-soaked sand. The helmets were weapons of torment. Some narrowed vision, forcing fighters to stumble half-blind while the audience roared with sadistic laughter. Others were so heavy that raising one's head became agony, every movement a battle against steel itself. Armor wasn't protection, it was punishment. Gladiators dressed as barbarians, forced to mimic Rome's defeated enemies. Their inevitable loss reminded everyone the empire always prevails, the message written in their dying gasps. Mismatched combat was cruel, but it wasn't the worst because Rome had a special category of victims, people who weren't meant to fight. They were meant to die screaming while the crowd laughed until their sides hurt. By midday, combat gave way to theater with death at center stage, a grotesque intermission before the main events. Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Criminals, deserters, slaves, prisoners of war became unwilling actors in executions disguised as myth, their terror the performance, their deaths the final act. Each punishment matched the crime. Thieves torn apart by wolves, arsonists burned alive, their skin bubbling and cracking, traitors thrown to lions, their screams cut short by massive jaws. Every scene was a morality play written in real blood, lessons carved into flesh. Lions were starved to a frenzy before release, their ribs showing, eyes mad with hunger. Bears chained in pits were goaded into fury with hot irons and pointed sticks. The uncertainty, would the beast strike fast or toy with its prey, kept the stands howling for more, the anticipation almost unbearable. During Emperor Trajan's celebrations after conquering Dacia, thousands of captives were slaughtered over 123 days. It wasn't random. It was organized, paced like acts in a drama, each day's deaths carefully choreographed for maximum impact. Every death crafted to keep the audience on edge, hearts pounding, palms sweating. The historian Strabo recorded victims tied to stakes with wild bulls released. The beasts trained to attack movement would gore prisoners, while the crowd placed bets on how long each victim would scream, coins exchanging hands as men died. This wasn't justice. It was entertainment with a moral veneer, cruelty dressed in righteousness. Pause for a second. 4 spectacles in, thousands dead, species extinct, humans turned into props. And if you think this is the worst Rome did, you're wrong. Because what comes next is where execution stopped being about death and became pure sadistic theater, art twisted into nightmare. For the condemned, it wasn't enough to die. They had to perform their demise, acting out Rome's myths with their own bodies, their final breath stage directions. Prisoners forced to play doomed heroes. Orpheus, the musician who tamed beasts. In myth, animals sat enchanted, peaceful. In the arena, a bear was released mid-performance and mauled the singer to death, his final notes becoming screams. The poet Martial witnessed this horror. "We saw Orpheus," he wrote, his words dripping with dark irony. "If he delayed, the beasts would have obeyed. But he was torn apart too soon." Another victim forced to play Icarus, suspended on crude wings of wax and feathers. He soared briefly before plunging to the beasts below, the crowd gasping, then cheering. Martial quipped with cruel wit, "The man must have wished for real feathers." The most grotesque? Pasiphae and the bull. Ancient sources describe shows that staged her mythological union with a mechanical beast, followed by a mauling that blurred execution, humiliation, and pornography. The boundaries of human decency obliterated. Tertullian recorded with disgust that female prisoners were sometimes dressed as priestesses and violated in front of the crowd before being killed, their dignity stripped before their lives. The message: Rome owned its myths just as it owned its people. Heroes, villains, kings, queens. None were safe from being rewritten as props in a pageant of death. For spectators, sideshows to thrill them. For the condemned, agonizing ends dressed in costumes. For Rome, propaganda made flesh, ideology written in agony. Everything so far happened on land in a normal arena. But Rome wasn't satisfied with terrestrial slaughter. They asked, what if we flooded the arena? What if we brought the ocean to the desert and made men die at sea? Mock naval battles, naumatiae, were spectacles on an insane scale where water itself became a weapon, drowning as entertainment. Julius Caesar in 46 BC dug an enormous basin near the Tiber, filled it with water and ships, creating an artificial sea in the heart of Rome. Thousands of captives shoved aboard, told to fight as rival fleets, given weapons and no hope. They weren't actors. They were men condemned to die for applause, their deaths scripted by emperors. Arrows, catapults, steel, a slaughterhouse afloat, blood mixing with water. Augustus expanded it with imperial ambition. In 2 BC, he created a basin almost 2,000 by 1 in 200 feet, fed by a custom aqueduct just to keep it full. 30 warships clashed, crammed with prisoners, fated never to leave alive, each wave a reminder of their doom. The message: Rome could command seas where none existed. Even nature bent to imperial whim, physics itself subservient to Roman power. By 52 AD, Claudius drained Lake Fucino for another Naumachia. When captives greeted him with "Morituri te salutant," those who are about to die salute you, their voices hollow with resignation, history gained one of its most haunting lines. Even the Colosseum had channels to flood for naval shows, then drain for combat the next day, engineers making death versatile. Cruelty became an engineering project. The arena never stopped innovating, never stopped finding new ways to kill. And as the empire aged, the spectacles grew more depraved, boundaries dissolving. Here's where Rome crossed every remaining line, where civilization itself seemed to crumble. Women forced to fight, sometimes with minimal clothing, sometimes against dwarfs or animals, a spectacle designed to shock and titillate. The satirist Juvenal mocked them with bitter words, yet records proved they fought for real, steel-biting flesh regardless of gender. Their presence blurred gender lines, but reinforced a darker truth that chilled the soul. No one was beyond Rome's hunger for spectacle. No life sacred. Prisoners dressed in pitch-soaked shirts and set ablaze, human torches illuminating evening games. Tertullian wrote with horror, "They were living torches, their screams providing ambiance." These weren't executions. They were warnings carved into living flesh, terror made visible. Men and women writhing as smoke curled into the sky while vendors hawked wine and children played nearby. Normalcy and nightmare side by side. Crucifixions borrowed from the East, staged inside the arena with theatrical precision. Men and women nailed to timber while the crowd ate lunch, munching on bread and olives. Death wasn't quick. It took hours, sometimes days, and the audience watched it all, some keeping vigil to see the final moment. Emperors became gladiators, power and madness fusing. Commodus, the ultimate showman, stormed into the Colosseum dressed as Hercules, his muscles oiled and gleaming, slaughtering hundreds of animals crippled beforehand to ensure his victory. He fought gladiators too, but only with every advantage rigged in his favor. Losing was impossible. Clapping was compulsory. Silence meant death. According to historian Cassius Dio, Commodus fought as a gladiator 735 times, his victories as hollow as they were numerous. Each victory cost the treasury 1,000,000 sesterces, Rome bankrupting itself for one man's delusions. Christians who refused to renounce their faith were thrown to lions, burned alive, or crucified as mass entertainment. Their deaths twisted into crowd-pleasing shows, martyrdom becoming spectacle. Deny your God or die, officials would demand. I cannot, they would reply, voices steady despite trembling bodies. These weren't executions. They were public relations campaigns against any ideology that challenged Rome's supremacy, power-crushing dissent with teeth and fire. We've covered 10 spectacles, hundreds of thousands dead, an ocean of blood spilled for cheers. Which one was the most depraved? The mythological executions where people acted out their own deaths, terror and performance merged. The living torches, humanity turned to fuel. The naval battles, drowning for applause. Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to know, at what point does entertainment become evil? So what happened after centuries of this? By the late Empire, Rome spent more on arena games than on its military, more on spectacles than on infrastructure. Priorities inverted. Not everyone cheered. Seneca confessed the executions hardened him, stripped away his humanity piece by piece. I come home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman, he admitted, his soul corroded, because I have been among humans. Violence seeped past the arena walls, poisoning daily life, spreading like infection. For Christians, the amphitheater was persecution and proof of Rome's spiritual bankruptcy. Tertullian called the shows seeds of cruelty, indicting an empire that cheered injustice as sport, that made murder entertainment. Economically, the games devoured fortunes. Rulers bankrupted themselves, chasing spectacles grand enough to outshine predecessors, each trying to be more shocking than the last. Culturally, the appetite dulled Rome's edge, softened its warrior spirit. Citizens who once honored discipline now demanded cheap bread and endless circuses. Juvenal mocked this with bitter precision. Panem et circenses. The craving for spectacle betrayed how far Rome had drifted from its roots, how far the mighty had fallen. As frontiers cracked and funds dried, the arenas crumbled, their stones cannibalized for other buildings. By the 5th century, the Colosseum stood hollow, its sand silent, its roars gone, only ghosts remaining. The moral question: could a society that trained its people to revel in suffering truly endure? History says no. The answer is written in ruins. If this story made your stomach turn, but you can't stop listening, hit like now. Because it means these unfiltered stories are what you really want, the truth that makes you uncomfortable. And if you want me to investigate more grotesque secrets that books hide, subscribe, because every week there's a new historical nightmare waiting. Today the Colosseum looms, scarred but proud, a monument to humanity's capacity for cruelty. Walk its tunnels and you might hear echoes, iron clashing, beasts roaring, 50,000 voices rising as one in savage triumph. The stone is easy to admire, beautiful in its architecture. Harder is remembering its purpose, what those walls witnessed. cruelty rehearsed until it felt normal, violence as routine as sunrise. Rome's arenas weren't about blood. They were about control, shaping how citizens thought, laughed, obeyed, molding minds through horror. Every hunt, every execution, every myth reborn in screams served one end: to make power look eternal, to make resistance seem futile. That's the warning carved into the ruins. A civilization that glorifies violence eventually crumbles beneath its own applause, destroyed by the very spectacles it created. But Rome wasn't the only empire that turned death into entertainment. There's another civilization that did something even more twisted with human sacrifice. Watch the video appearing on your screen now. See you in the next nightmare. If this forgotten history moved you, subscribe. Every subscription helps us unearth the next buried truth and fight historical erasure. We refuse to let their voices fade into the dust.